A new United Nations report encourages African countries to harness the growing tourism sector. Kenya becomes the first country on the continent to debut a generic HIV drug. And wearable tech meets high fashion in Berlin. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now, a new report finds flourishing tourism in Africa is putting millions of people to work and adding billions of dollars to national economies. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development's annual Economic Development in Africa report projects continued robust growth in tourism in the coming years. The UN Trade Conference's Secretary General says intra-Africa tourism, which now exceeds visitors from Europe, the United States and Asia, is behind the fast growth in the industry. The World Travel and Tourism Council projects the total contribution of tourism to Africa's gross domestic product will amount to $296 billion by 2026. The Tourism Council also expects this sector to generate nearly 29 million jobs in 2026. That is up from 21 million in 2016. The report also reveals the African government must liberalize air transportation to realize the potential of inter-regional tourism for the continent's economic growth. Well, European Union and African ministers are meeting in Rome Thursday to try and work through steps to stem the migrant influx into Italy. Italy is the main point of arrival for most African migrants to European shores this year, with boats sent out almost daily from lawless Libya. Italian Foreign Minister Angelino Alfano says investing in African countries to create job opportunities for the local population is one of the main initiatives EU and nations hope will slow down the number of people making the journey across the Mediterranean Sea. Now, tighter border controls in transit countries are also needed, with greater help on the agenda for African nations to dismantle human trafficking rings. The conference is being attended by foreign ministers of African nations used as transit routes by migrants, as well as other EU nations, including Austria, Spain, and the Netherlands. Well, now for more on the Rome conference, journalist Giovanni Sorrentino joins me live via Skype from Rome. Good evening, Giovanni.
Good evening.
Now, there have been so many discussions, conferences. Tell me, is there something really new and fresh that has come out of this conference?
Well, there was an informal meeting of European Union interior ministers in Tallinn, Estonia, which is the country that holds the temporary presidency of the European Council. Debate over dealing with the refugee influx is becoming increasingly bitter in Italy, whose economy is lagging behind its European peers before national elections next year. And Italy is demanding more help from its European Union partners with the asylum seeker crisis, saying its capacity is, to cope is at the limit. But no real news are emerging from these meetings because other countries are firmly against proposals of asylum seekers to be taken to other EU ports to share the burden.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of what the Minister Alfano says, that there could be possibly helping African countries to create more job opportunities, are other European countries on board? Because this means like increasing how much they're giving to these countries.
Well, unfortunately, this subject is always sort of aside of the discussion because mostly they debate about how to cope, how to deal with this huge number of migrants coming day by sea and arriving in Italy. Of course, the only way to solve the problem is to invest more money in Africa, but only probably Germany and other single countries are trying to follow this kind of policies. There's no union action in the European Union for this very welcome solution.
Now, very quickly, have you heard anything from any of the African ministers as to what they propose to do?
No, nothing is heard, and we hope that next Thursday meeting is going to be crucial for finding a solution about this.
Well, we'll be listening keenly to hear what comes out of this meeting. Giovanni, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's journalist Giovanni Sorrentino joining me live via Skype from Rome in Italy. To East Africa now, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and his main rival Raila Odinga have pulled out of two televised presidential debates ahead of August 8th election. That is according to their parties. Now, initially, the two frontrunners were to go head-to-head, while 6 smaller candidates will hold a separate debate on Monday, with a second debate on July the 24th. However, officials in both parties say Kenyatta and Odinga decided to pull out after they got wind of plans to change the format, pitting all 8 candidates against each other. Kenya held its first ever televised presidential debate in 2013, including both Kenyatta and Odinga. Afterwards, Kenyatta complained that he had been unfairly targeted by the moderators. Well, before heading to the G20 summit in Germany, U.S. President Donald Trump stopped in Poland on Thursday, and he said that America and Europe have suffered in court one terror attack after another, but that we are going to get it to stop in court. During his speech in Warsaw, Poland, Trump also warned there are dire threats to our security and way of life, and said the borders of the United States will always be closed to terrorism and extremism. Mr. Trump said, "We cannot accept those who reject our values and use hatred to justify violence against the innocent." Well, President Trump landed a few hours ago in Hamburg, Germany, for the G20 summit, where he is expected to meet and likely disagree with German Chancellor Angela Merkel on issues of climate and trade. But as VOA Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez reports, counterterrorism and Chinese steel dumping could bring them together.
As police step up patrols and protesters set up camp, no one is expecting an easy weekend in Hamburg. Angela Merkel pledges to work toward consensus, but foresees no miracles in her relations with the U.S. administration.
Ich glaube, da gibt es ein hohes Maß an Gemeinsamkeit und in anderen Fragen gibt es ein hohes.
I think there is a high degree of similarities. On other issues, there is a high degree of differences. And therefore, I don't want to anticipate the talks. But I do not think we will have unified positions on all issues at the end. But it is sensible and honest to talk to each other on all issues of international diplomacy.
President Trump says he has bold plans to slap tariffs or impose quotas on steel imports, the latest and perhaps most serious of threats to protect U.S. industry and part of his America First strategy, one that has G20 partners feeling nervous.
And what he's doing, he's throwing all kinds of cards up in the air, NAFTA, a critique of climate change, because he actually wants, I think, a bit of zero-based policy. I think at the end of the day, he probably, of course, wants free trade in the win-win sense. But what he's trying to expose is perhaps some of the hypocrisy of countries like China, who talk the talk of openness but don't always deliver. So there's going to be a real clash of the titans at this summit.
Trump's shock talk has brought results. After threatening to not stand by NATO allies who do not pay their share of defense, came pledges by members to boost their contributions. He said he would rip up the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now he has a deal with Mexico on sugar exports. The U.S. leader's target now is China and its cheap steel exports that are blamed for killing jobs not only in the United States, but in Britain and other G20 states, including Germany. Climate is a big issue for some G20 leaders, but analysts say the threat of cheap Chinese steel imports could be a common cause and take precedence.
Many of the G20 members are experiencing exactly the same kinds of economic forces and constraints that the US is facing. So, for example, in the UK, the steel mills in Port Talbot and Redcar were closed because of really overcapacity of supply by the China steel sector. This is not very much different from what's been going on in Ohio and Pennsylvania. So I think that this actually has the opportunity, the chance to get a lot of support.
If leaders manage to find common ground, it will be in sharp contrast to what is on the streets of Hamburg, where protesters have been out since early in the week. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, London.
Well, the highly anticipated first meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin Friday will be closely watched, but not because of any expectations of progress. While both leaders have expressed a desire to repair relations damaged over Russia's interference in Ukraine, expectations of easing what some call a new Cold War are low. And viewers Danielle Scheff reports the meeting has been clouded by ongoing investigations of the Trump campaign's alleged links to Russia and Russian hacking.
This first face-to-face meeting will take place on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg. The Kremlin says terrorism, Syria, and Ukraine will top their agenda. The White House says President Trump will decide what to discuss, calling it a normal bilateral meeting. But Trump could raise any topic, say analysts.
The president has his own impulses. He may decide he wants to push the meeting in some unexpected direction, and we have to be prepared for this. This is a little bit his style.
However, ongoing investigations into the Trump campaign's alleged collusion with Russia are casting a shadow over administration hopes the meeting could lead to improved relations.
Everything that happens between Trump and Putin is going to be seen in that context. Was Trump too friendly? Was Trump actually trying to seem very tough on Russia in order to quiet down his critics back at home? I think those are a lot of questions that we'll see the answers to very shortly.
But few expect Trump to raise the issue of Russian hacking that U.S. intelligence say was aimed at helping him get elected. On the streets of Moscow, Russians still hope after the two leaders meet, relations will get better.
It can't last long. Someone should realize that if we do not collaborate together, we do not progress.
Critics argue any steps toward cooperation will likely be limited to rhetoric.
We see currently neither a concrete agenda nor concrete goals for both leaders, nor even the willpower to implement these goals. Putin seems to wait for some steps from Trump, while Trump is unable to cope with his own problems inside America. He does not know how to shape his attitude to Putin. No objective, no willpower, no progress.
Regardless of the outcome, the bilateral meeting is a win for the Kremlin, adds Kolesnikov. If it goes badly, Russia will blame the U.S. If it goes well, Putin will take the credit. Daniel Scheff, VOA News, Washington.
Well, foreign ministers from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt met in Cairo Wednesday to discuss tensions with Qatar. The four countries have accused the oil and gas-rich Gulf country of fostering terrorism in the region, and last month they cut diplomatic and transport ties with Qatar. Doha has denied any links with terrorism and has in turn accused its neighbors of carrying out a smear campaign against Doha. VOA's Larissa Hoke has more.
Qatar's neighbors have given officials in Doha conditions for ending the month-long boycott.
There is a political and economic boycott. They will continue until Qatar changes its policy for the better. We all hope for that.
After the meeting in Cairo, the foreign ministers of Qatar's four neighbors said officials in Doha are refusing to comply with their conditions.
We haven't seen any real sign after yesterday's answer from Qatar that it's interested in its brothers and neighbors as much as it's interested in extremism, incitement, destruction, and terrorism.
Meanwhile, in London, Qatar's foreign minister told an audience that cutting diplomatic and transport ties was intended to create anti-Qatar sentiment in the West.
We believe that the entire campaign is mainly driven by Saudi and the United Arab Emirates, and I think those are the countries we have to engage in what are the real motives and the real grievances behind it.
Qatar has been accused of supporting the terrorist group Hamas and its sponsor Iran. Its neighbors say the government in Doha also has turned a blind eye to its citizens' private donations to jihadist groups. Bahrain's foreign minister said any country that shelters terrorism will face similar condemnation.
There are clear policies that are not only agreed upon by these four countries, but by the whole world. So we have a responsibility to stand against terrorism, against Islamic State, terrorism from Iran and others.
Western countries are concerned that a prolonged dispute between Qatar and neighboring countries could cause unrest in the already volatile region. Trump reminded parties in the dispute that they all made commitments to fight terrorism during a summit with him in Saudi Arabia in May. The White House said the president has called on them to honor their pledge to stop terrorist financing and discredit extremist ideology. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Coming up, Kenya's new HIV treatment offers hope for patients. Stay with us.
My name's Carla Babb, and I work the Pentagon Beat. That access helps me to do better stories. Every day it's my responsibility to collect all of the defense news. It keeps our VOA viewers informed. I get to travel all across the globe. Anything that's defense related and how to protect and keep people safe, that's where I'll go. So it's never a dull moment at the Pentagon. My name is Carla Babb. This is my beat.
Well, it's time now for our health update, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu with news on the fight against fake drugs in Africa. Lino.
Lawyers from across Africa gathered in Cameroon this week to call for tougher legislation against counterfeit medicine. 60 tons of counterfeit medicine was burned after being seized by customs officials in Cameroon, who said the stockpile had an estimated value of $80,000. Lawyers in Cameroon say it is high time for the country to join African states to start considering the transportation and commercialization of fake drugs as a major crime, not a simple offense punishable by fines and seizure of the illicit goods. The World Health Organization says falsified medical products may contain no active ingredient, the wrong active ingredient, or the wrong amount of the correct active ingredient. The WHO says about 100,000 deaths a year in Africa are linked to counterfeit drugs. Now, Malawi and the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, have recently opened an air corridor to test the effectiveness of drones in humanitarian emergencies and for other development uses. The test corridor is centered at the Kasungu Aerodrome with a 40-kilometer radius and focusing on 3 tasks: generating aerial images of crisis situations, using drones to extend Wi-Fi or mobile phone signals across difficult terrain in emergencies, and delivering low-weight emergency supplies. Landlocked Malawi has limited road access in many of its rural areas, which makes it difficult to get help to needy communities.
The innovation will help us in a number of ways. Apart from delivering, medical samples to testing laboratories, it can also do a lot of mapping, land surveying, and several other important, activities.
So you can really see what can drones do in terms of transport, bring medical supplies to health centers, or bring educational supplies to school. What can they do in terms of connectivity in areas where we don't have coverage of the telecommunications network? And they can also show what we can do with the imagery they acquire in terms of mapping out road networks, mapping out natural environment degradation, mapping out infrastructure. And basically it's open for private sector to explore, and it puts Malawi on the map.
Kenya is the first African country to start using a modern generic version of the latest HIV drug that can improve and prolong the lives of tens of thousands of people who suffer severe side effects and resistance to treatments. Dolutegravir, or DTG, is a medication used for the treatment of HIV infection. A generic version of dolutegravir, first approved in the United States in 2013, is being given to 20,000 patients in Kenya and was officially launched recently in the capital, Nairobi. It is the drug of choice for people with HIV in high-income countries who have never taken antiretroviral therapy before, and for those who have developed a resistance to other treatment.
More effective drugs, more effective regimen, fewer side effects, and name them. So to us, I think in HIV care, in TB care.
Datiest Ogutu, who has been living with HIV for 15 years, started taking the drug this year. She says this treatment suits her better than her previous one.
Some people think it's a myth, but it's a reality that you actually get nightmares. And then with the efavirenz, I developed a condition of anemia because it would wear me out and it would drain me, and my body cells would not reproduce themselves. So unlike now that you can see me and my flesh looks full of life, you can't tell whether I'm sick or not, and else I tell you.
The brand name version of DTG is Tyvekay, produced by VIIV Healthcare, majority owned by GlaxoSmithKline. DTG will first target about 27,000 people before being rolled out countrywide. Professor Sylvia Ojo is the Kenya Country Director for the University of Maryland School of Medicine and is monitoring the introduction of DTG.
85% suggests that the majority of patients are tolerating their treatment. Now, the 15% could be people who are non-adherent for various reasons, could be people who are experiencing toxicity, or could be people who failed for one way or the other for reasons that may not be clear.
Kenya is working with Unitaid to make medicines more readily available and fast, to reduce manufacturing costs by allowing generic companies to access patents for a small royalty and produce them cheaply for the developing world.
All the 1.5 million people living in HIV need to be on treatment. As I mentioned, about 1 million and above are already on treatment. So we are looking for about 400,000 because some are already in the system and we are working them out.
Observers say Kenya has made great strides in addressing HIV. The number of new infections in Kenya has almost halved over the last decade to 80,000 a year, thanks to increased testing, treatment, and awareness. UNAIDS aims to reach 90% of people diagnosed with HIV with antiretroviral treatment by 2020. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, Lenore, thank you very much. Now be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Now, a team of Afghan teenage girls who are denied a visa to participate in a robotics contest in Washington say they will not be deterred and have sent their homemade robot to the contest. Now, the girls from the western province of Herat twice made the dangerous journey to the U.S. Embassy in Kabul to apply for visas, but were turned down for reasons the State Department has not disclosed. While disappointed, the girls are glad their robot will be part of the competition. VOA's Berzan Hamdani reports.
The 6 teenage girls are members of the first Afghan robotics team. They were chosen from talented girls from 10 schools in western Herat province to participate in the coming Global Challenge Robotics contest in Washington. Although they were denied visas to come to the United States, the team members proudly sent their entry, a ball-sorting robot, to the competition.
Our robot is a color recognizer and ball collector, and the more balls it collects, it scores higher. And we're happy that Afghanistan will participate in the contest.
Lida, another team member, says they remain motivated.
Once we were denied, we became upset, but we kept working, and after we returned to Herat from Kabul, we got training and constructed our robot to send to the U.S. to prove to the world that Afghan girls can do it, and Afghan girls can develop their talents across the world.
We have not been deterred. We kept constructing our robot and sent it via Federal Express to the contest.
The visa denial was widely reported in the United States and even prompted former presidential contender Senator Bernie Sanders to post a Facebook appeal urging the State Department to reconsider. The girls reportedly will be able to watch their ball-sorting robot compete via a video link. For producer Khalil Nurzai and Muhammad Ahmadi, I am Bejan Hamdard, VOA News.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Fashion and tech meet in Berlin. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, Bollywood legend Shah Rukh Khan and actress Anushka Sharma donned matching t-shirts to launch their new song, Beach Beach Main, or in between, at a popular nightclub in Mumbai. Now, the disco-inspired track is from their upcoming movie, When Harry Met Sejal. Produced by Red Chillies Entertainment, the film will be released on August 4th, 2017. Next up, thousands of lucky fans with tickets to Wimbledon are eager to see their heroes play in person. Tucked away from the public are IBM's technology rooms. Now, this year, the company has created a mobile app called Ask Fred that fans can use to find their way around the venue. Now, the plan for the future is that fans at the event can access information about every point scored by their favorite player without having to be courtside. Now, computers are analyzing how players are matched and how they recover during play. The analysis will enable the fans to predict how close the match will be. Well, in other tech news, while fashion is making beautiful music in Berlin, when you touch the seams on this dress, the sound of the violin can be heard. A jacket lays down beats. Another garment making noise at the Fashion Tech Conference is the interactive octopus dress. The garment has sensors that recognize movements around the dress. The 3D printed dress then reacts to the motions by lifting its tentacles, very much like a real octopus will react in water. Now, the one-day Fashion Tech Conference is held twice a year in Berlin, and that's what's trending today, and that's our show. Thanks a lot for watching, and we look forward to seeing you very soon tomorrow.
Welcome to English in a Minute. We all need air to breathe.
Hey, Jonathan, guess who's coming to dinner tonight?
Who?
Franco.
Not him.
What? He's fun, and he really knows how to keep the conversation going.
He's loud and talks only about himself.